Hello everyone, welcome back to GGN. This is part 2 for this news report. Today it's Thursday, January 10th, 2013. I'm Darko and my website is ggnonline.com and on YouTube, ddarko2012, ddarko2013. Still working on my password issue for the 2013 account, so I've been posting there. Hopefully we'll get that going soon. Alright, so we're going to continue with eugenics. And we left off with this minimum of 40 children paralyzed after new meningitis vaccine in Africa, which also resulted in hallucinations and convulsions. Drug trials causing havoc to human life, says Supreme Court from January 3rd, 2013. New Delhi, the Supreme Court said Thursday that unregulated clinical trials of new drugs were causing havoc in the country as it ordered the health ministry to monitor any new applications for tests. So it goes on here and it says that the comments were made during a hearing on a petition detailing deaths and health problems caused by clinical trials carried out on Indians, that's people from India, of course, often without their knowledge or consent. Kind of like people who have been sterilized without their consent, they didn't even know it. But like in Africa, they're so poor, a lot of them will actually get paid to take these trials, which could harm them very badly. And of course, they sign waivers and stuff like that. Uncontrolled clinical trials are causing havoc to human life, says this justice. Earlier this year, 12 doctors were accused of conducting secret trials on children and patients with learning disabilities. They paid fines of less than $100. And the whole thing with this whole flu thing, I'm sure most of you already know, but there's all kinds of natural remedies for winter flus and stuff like that. The biggest thing is good health, not being obese, of course. But getting enough rest and drinking, enough fluids and stuff like that. Of course, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not giving medical advice. Don't try to sue me. I'm not. I'm just saying what I would do, right? Vitamin D is very important when you're not getting as much sunlight. Vitamin C. Oil of oregano is the next one. This guy was saying chicken farmer uses oregano oil and cinnamon in place of antibiotics. Also, you have colloidal silver. I take a little bit of that during the winter. As far as antibiotic. Not too much, though. U.S. health is lousy compared with peer nations, says a report. Remember, just the recent report, it said that Americans are living longer, yet they're basically sicker. They're living longer, but more sick. Americans live shorter lives and are in general worse health than citizens of other wealthy nations, according to an extensive report released Wednesday by the National Research Council and Institute of Medicine. So it says here they determined that American men had the lowest life expectancy among men in 17 countries, including wealthy European nations, Australia, Canada, and Japan. U.S. women had the second lowest life expectancy. Only Danish women fared worse. 9 areas in which Americans came in below average were infant mortality, low birth rate, injuries and homicides, adolescent pregnancy, and sexual transmitted diseases. Drug-related deaths, obesity and diabetes, heart disease, chronic lung disease, and disability. Pretty interesting. They said the U.S. earned relatively high marks for its low cancer death rates and success controlling blood pressure and cholesterol. That's because, Lipitor, whatever, all those stupid drugs and statins and stuff that they push on everybody. And then, of course, the low cancer deaths are, that would be due to what? That would be due to all the pharmaceutical business, because like we said, cancer is a big business. There's a lot of money to be made. So if people are living longer, it's only because they're paying a crap load of money that they don't actually have. So they're just having to work their jobs to pay off their medical care, so that they could have stayed alive, and then so they can keep working to pay off their medical debt. Even Americans who are white, insured, have college educations, and seem to have healthy behaviors are in worse health than similar people in other nations, they found. That's an interesting conclusion the researchers drew. It is possible that there is something about American culture and the high value it places on individualism and personal autonomy that results in its poor performance. It may also be that the U.S. is ahead of the curve on a general trend. The other nations will also start to experience health problems that have been on the rise here since the 80s. Yeah, I think it's because they're independent that they were targeted by the globalists to bring us down. That's why, of course, they attack the males of fighting age, mostly, of course, in the youth, right? So that makes sense. So it probably will trickle over to across the pond, as they say, to Europe. And like I said, it'll take time, right? The eugenics will take time. That's what we'll get into in this video. Guns driving down life expectancy in America. Can you believe that, guys? Never thought you'd see titles like this, but violence not more common in U.S., but is more deadly. Americans account for 35 to 50% of the world's civilian-owned firearms, with 89 firearms for every 100 Americans. So, and it's interesting because you actually have, Pravda and Russians actually writing articles telling Americans to pull their heads out of their asses, don't give up your guns, don't, learn from our mistakes, basically. But, they put out this propaganda, and some people just don't want to listen because they don't know their history. It says here, research suggests that we may actually face a declining world population in the coming years. So the world seemingly is relentless march towards overpopulation achieved a notable milestone in 2012 somewhere on the planet, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, estimates that the 7th billion living person came into existence. They say if the trend continues, of course, this is based off their mentality, living conditions are likely to be bleak for much of humanity. Another milestone generated no media coverage at all. It took humankind 13 years to add its 7 billion person. That's longer than the 12 years it took to add the 6 billionth, the first time in human history that interval has grown. So it goes on here and it says, in other words, the rate of global population growth has slowed, and it is expected to keep slowing. Indeed, according to experts' best estimates, the total population of Earth will stop growing within the lifespan of people alive today, and then it will fall. The counterintuitive notion in the United States, where we've often heard often and loudly that world population growth is a perilous and perhaps unavoidable threat to our future as a species, but the population decline is a familiar concept in the rest of the developed world, where fertility has long since fallen far below the 2.1 live births per woman required to maintain population equilibrium. In Germany, which I was talking about, the birth rate has sunk to 1.36, worse even than its low fertility neighbors, Spain at 1.48 and Italy 1.4. They say here that that's not so bad compared with Russia and China, each of whose populations could fall by half. Countries that actually help keep the population numbers, such as the United States and Mexico, are actually starting to have declining birth rates. From 60 to 2009, Mexico's fertility rate tumbled from 7.3 live births to 2.4. India dropped from 6 to 2.5, and Brazil fell from 6.15 to 1.9, so that's pretty big numbers. Even in sub-Saharan Africa, where the average birth rate remains, relatively blistering 4.6, fertility is projected to fall below the replacement level by the 2070s. South Korea's youth population will be cut by more than half in 2060, or by 2060. So according to government statistics, the country became an aging society in 2000, a label given if roughly 7% of the population is 65 or older. The country is set to become a super-aged society as its over 65 population is set to increase to 20% by 2026. China's one-child policy impact is analyzed. People growing up under China's one-child policy are less trusting and more risk-averse and even more pessimistic, a study concludes. The team of researchers from Australia compared who were born just before the policy was introduced with those born after. They used economic games and surveys to assess the participants' behavioral and personality traits. But it goes on and says, we found that people born under the one-child policy are less likely to take risk and less competitive than those who were born before. So it goes on here and it says that those under the one-child policy were less conscientious, slightly more neurotic, and significantly more pessimistic than those before. Their one-child policy in China was introduced in 1979, restricts couples in urban areas to have only one child. It's interesting because I saw this article, I just brought it up right now from the 2nd of this month. What's driving China's new push to move millions of rural families into cities? Well, because they can force a one-child policy on them. It says people who live in rural areas are generally self-sufficient and aren't reliant upon big box stores. This is the editor of Stratris saying this. China is facing a supply and demand crisis, so they will push their citizens into the stack-em-pack-em urban sardine cans like Beijing. It says in China there is a very common belief that the one-child generation is spoiled and selfish and they are not hard-working. I read some articles too that make bad soldiers too. Scientists say the top-selling weed killer, Monsanto's Roundup, is linked to infertility. I've covered this type of link or research, at least 3 times since I started GGN. But Purdue University professor addressed the dangers of this glyphosate to American and European officials in 2011. You can go check that out. Link will be posted in YouTube's video description. Marine bases ex-residents, many are ill and are only now learning of the toxic waters. So it says here he saw a half-page ad from the Marine Corps alerting former residents of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, if they lived on the base from 1957 to 1987, they may have been exposed to contaminated water. He says he thought about his mother, the wife of a Marine who died in 1960, who had died of cancer, it says. They said it turned out to be poisonous. You said that you can see why I'm angry at the military. It says we ate food cooked in the water, we drank the water, we bathed in the water. So everything we did in the water. So that's why water is so precious, and that's why you'll see protesters down in South America. I mean, they're willing to fight and die for their good, clean, quality water. You know, whereas here up in the United States, we dump toxic waste in it and say it's good for us. And then, you know, if people don't like it, you tell them to go to hell, right? U.S. starts to ban bottled water. A law passed by the town of Concord in Massachusetts went into effect in the new year, making single-serving bottles of water illegal. However, Coke or other soft drinks are exempt. It only applies to non-sparkling, unflavored drinking water. The ban is intended to encourage use of tap water and curb the worldwide problem of plastic pollution. How about you just solve the problem by allowing containers that aren't just made of petrol-based chemicals or ingredients, right? Like I said, hemp containers. You can line them with something natural, like a sugar-based type thing, so it doesn't leak. I mean, there's your problem. There's your problem solved right there. You know, you don't have to just ban water so you can avoid the tap water. Arguments begin in case of minister accused of crimes against humanity for homosexuality remarks. Lawyers for a Massachusetts pastor have asked a judge to dismiss a lawsuit filed against him by a foreign homosexual advocacy group accusing him of crimes against humanity. One of the groups that was making these arguments against the individual, the pastor, was a George Soros-founded Center for Constitutional Rights, accused Lively of violating the law of nations and crimes against humanity, as well as conspiracy and various civil rights crimes because of his outspokenness against homosexual agenda in Uganda. And I don't know, it's weird. I've come across a lot of articles about Africa where they're actually not for it. I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't be able to do it, but if you're living in a tribal type scenario or stuff like that, they're not really on board with it as much out there. They're basically accusing these crimes, these violent acts against these homosexuals in Africa on this individual for his speeches and citing this. National Cathedral opens doors to gay weddings. The D.C. Church will use new Episcopal right for same-sex marriage. So, as the nation's most prominent church, the decision carries huge symbolism. They have long been the spiritual center of the nation, hosting presidential inaugural services and funerals for former presidents. It's interesting because I saw this article too from Newser. Anti-gay sermon costs pastor role at inauguration. He will no longer give the benediction. So pastor was supposed to deliver the benediction at Obama's inauguration, will no longer do it because of an anti-gay sermon he gave in the mid-1990s. So the number of U.S. children living in single-parent homes has nearly doubled in 50 years. This is from January 4th. And it says that the number of children living in single-parent homes has doubled since the 1960s, according to data from the 2010 census. So it goes on here, says showing the percentage of two-parent families has dropped significantly over the past decade in all 50 states, and the total number of American households with children increased by 160,000. The number of two-parent households decreased by 1.2 million. It says today 1/3 of American children, a total of 15 million, are being raised without a father. Nearly 5 million more children live without a mother. A growing number of studies show that fatherlessness has a major negative impact on the social and emotional development of children. So they blame the trend for many of society's ills. Says he claims the way to deal with poverty, drugs, crime, and other hot buttons cultural issues is to strengthen the two-parent family, deal with absent fathers, he says, and the rest will follow. I saw an article, I can't remember, something crazy similar of a wife doing something to a husband like this recently. Ex-wife hog-ties Florida man, drags him behind a truck. So they used a stun gun on him and tied him to a truck bumper and dragged him for half a mile. This is actually, she tricked him and got him drunk with some other guy and then just manhandled them and that. We'll finish off with this. Planned Parenthood video promotes sadomasochism as adventure and fun. And click the link to watch the videos. You'll be greeted by Getting Kinky BDSM 101, an instructional video by Planned Parenthood that attempts to make sadomasochism sound like harmless, pleasant romp in the park. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.